Just so impressive.
And honestly, with Arena, it's very difficult to play when she gets a good day also of good serving.
Things I have to be proud of, and yeah, I'm leaving this tournament without any disappointment.
ELENA Rybakina breaks silence on Sabalenka. Cameras capture shocking exchange. And the moment Sabalenka lost that match, everything changed. Because her collapse wasn't just physical, it was emotional, raw, and painfully real. Cameras caught her shaking, wiping tears, struggling to breathe through the weight of defeat. Fans watched her walk off the court, holding back sobs she simply couldn't hide. But what nobody expected was what Rybakina would say afterward. A calm voice cutting through the storm, revealing what truly happened between them. The tension, the misunderstanding, the words exchanged in those fragile seconds. For the first time, Rybakina opened up not to accuse, but to explain. And her truth might reshape everything we thought we knew about this rivalry. From the moment Aryna Sabalenka and ELENA Rybakina first stepped into the same arenas, people whispered that their paths were destined to collide. Not softly, not politely, but violently, like two storms drawn to the same sky. One carried fire, the other carried ice. One streamed her truth, the other buried it beneath silence. And for years, those contrasts created a tension the tennis world felt everywhere. In locker rooms, in warm-ups, in the long walks through narrow tunnels where champions pass each other without a word. But nobody, not even the most devoted followers of their rivalry, imagined it would come to this. A night where Aryna Sabalenka's strength would finally crack, and Rybakina's silence would speak louder than anything she had ever said. It all began long before the cameras caught the breaking point. Sabalenka had always played with pressure pressing against her chest, a pressure she refused to admit was there. Every match, every final, every trophy became a battle not just with her opponent, but with herself. People saw her power, her roar, her fists clenched after every winner. What they didn't see was the exhaustion growing behind her eyes, the quiet fear that one day her fire wouldn't be enough. And on this night, that fear finally caught her. Rybakina walked into the match like she always did. Still, unreadable, her calm so complete it could unsettle anyone standing across from her. She wasn't cold, she simply didn't let the world inside. And Sabalenka, who felt everything too much, couldn't understand how someone could show so little. The match unfolded like a story that had been waiting for its ending. Rybakina's precision, Sabalenka's raw force, Rybakina's patience, Sabalenka's urgency. With every point, the pressure built, shaking the match like a fault line ready to break. And then it happened. The final point slipped away and the stadium fell into that strange, suspended silence where everyone knows something is about to crack. Sabalenka sat down, and for one long moment she tried to hold herself together. Her jaw clenched, her hands trembled. She stared at the court as if the lines themselves had betrayed her. But the emotion she had buried for months surged up at once, too heavy, too fast, too sharp. Her chest rose, her breath caught, and the tears came. Not quiet tears, not controlled tears, but the kind that shake the body, the kind that come when an athlete finally realizes the weight she carried was bigger than the match she lost. The cameras captured everything, the quiver in her lips, the red in her eyes, the way she tried to wipe her face before anyone noticed. But everyone noticed. And then the moment that would replay everywhere, online, in analysis videos, in whispered conversations about mental strength and breaking points. Sabalenka lifted her racket, and with an explosive swing, she smashed it against the court. The frame snapped, and the sound echoed. The emotion spilled out of her like a storm that had been waiting to break for too long. She whispered something under her breath, a shaken, fractured attempt to explain a pain she couldn't control. The words didn't matter. The tears did. The rawness did. The humanity did. Across the net, Rybakina stood still, watching with an expression no one could read. Respect? Shock? Concern? Nobody knew. But one thing was clear. This wasn't another loss. This was the moment that would follow them into every match, every interview, every rumor, the moment that would push Rybakina for the first time to finally break her silence. The match was over, but the atmosphere felt heavier than ever, like the tension didn't know the game had ended. People were still whispering about Sabalenka's tears, replaying the image of her shaking hands and shattered racket. But what most didn't see was what happened in the seconds right after, when the roar of the stadium faded into a strange, suffocating quiet. Rybakina approached the net first. Calm, controlled, her expression the same unreadable mask she always wore. But beneath that stillness was something else, a flicker of emotion she didn't allow to show. Because for all her composure, even she had felt the weight of the night. Sabalenka wasn't just any opponent. She was the one player who pushed her to places inside herself she rarely visited. But as she extended her hand, Sabalenka hesitated. 1 second. 2 seconds. A small pause that wasn't meant to be dramatic, but became dramatic anyway. Her eyes were red, still wet. Her lips pressed into a thin line, trying to hold back frustration that was already slipping through the cracks. When she finally offered her hand, it was shaky, and the cameras caught it perfectly. Rybakina's fingers brushed Sabalenka's. The handshake lasted barely half a heartbeat, and that's all the cameras needed. Right before they let go, Sabalenka muttered something, low, tight, unfiltered. No one in the stadium heard the words clearly, but her tone was unmistakable. Wounded, defensive, angry at the universe. And even though the exchange lasted only a breath, the tension it released was instant. Rybakina's eyebrow lifted slightly, the smallest reaction, but enough to shift the energy between them. She heard something in Sabalenka's voice. Not cruelty, not disrespect, something more complicated. Something almost like accusation? They walked away from the net at the same time, but in opposite emotional directions. Sabalenka stormed toward her chair, wiping her face with the back of her wrist as though trying to erase the moment. Rybakina moved slower, quieter, as she always did, but with a stiffness that hadn't been there minutes earlier. She glanced briefly toward Sabalenka, and that moment right there became the spark, because Sabalenka saw the glance, and she misread it. To her emotionally bruised mind, it wasn't a look of empathy. It felt like pity. And nothing, absolutely nothing, cuts deeper for a champion than pity. She threw her broken racket onto the bench with a thud, the sound loud enough for Rybakina to look again, and this time the glances collided, sharp, silent, electric. It lasted half a second, but half a second is all a rivalry needs. Someone from the sideline whispered something to Rybakina, trying to get her attention for the trophy ceremony, but she didn't answer right away. She kept her eyes on Sabalenka, not coldly, not angrily, but with a confusion that looked dangerously close to concern. And that's when Sabalenka snapped. She stood up suddenly, as if stung, scooping her towel with a force that made the chair shake. The movement startled a ball kid beside her, and Sabalenka immediately apologized, quietly, genuinely, but trembling with emotion. Yet the damage was done. The cameras had seen everything, and social media had already begun asking the questions Sabalenka feared most. What did she say at the net? What did Rybakina hear? What did that glance mean? But the real trigger wasn't the words, it wasn't the handshake, it wasn't even the smashed racket. The real trigger was the silence the silent miscommunication between two athletes who never fully understood each other, even after years of battling across the net. And tonight, that silence was about to become the loudest story in tennis. Because Rybakina, the player who almost never speaks about conflict, was about to break her silence, and the world wasn't ready for what she would reveal next. The next morning, the tennis world woke to a storm. Clips of Sabalenka's tears, her trembling hands, the shattered racket, and the electric glance exchanged with Rybakina had gone viral. Social media feeds overflowed with analysis, judgment, and endless speculation. Fans were divided. Some empathized, some criticized, and others argued over the smallest gestures, as if a single glance could define an athlete's character. The hashtag threads didn't just track a match, they tracked a human unraveling. The backlash hit Sabalenka first. Headlines asked if she had lost more than a match, if her mental fortitude, her reputation, even her identity as a champion had cracked. Commentators replayed her every movement, her quivering voice, her broken racket, like evidence in a trial she hadn't consented to. And for someone who had always been defined by sheer power, by dominance, by fearlessness on court, the vulnerability was jarring. It was almost cruel how the world consumed it, as if witnessing her humanity made some people uncomfortable. Meanwhile, whispers about Rybakina's role were everywhere. Was she insensitive? Did her calm, her composure, somehow provoke Sabalenka's breakdown? Nobody really knew what had passed between them, but the imagination of millions filled the gaps. Every raised eyebrow, every measured step, every glance at the broken racket became a headline. And the silence from both players, normally a shield, only fueled the fire. Amid the chaos, analysts tried to rationalize what happened. They dissected the match, the body language, the post-match handshake, the glance, even the anthem. Some argued that Rybakina's restraint was a mark of respect, a refusal to escalate a volatile moment. Others insisted it was coldness, arrogance, a subtle way to assert dominance over a rival. The court had always been a stage, but now it was a battleground for interpretation, and the war was being fought in 280-character bursts, comment threads, and opinion segments. Sabalenka herself stayed off social media, retreating into quiet reflection. Inside the locker room, her coaches and teams circled around her like a protective wall. They knew what the world didn't, that behind the public breakdown was an athlete grappling with more than loss. She questioned herself, her preparation, her reactions. Was this the first crack in a champion's armor? Or was it a storm that would pass, leaving her stronger? Every movement, every word, every gesture from that night replayed in her mind like slow-motion footage she couldn't pause. And then there was Rybakina. While Sabalenka wrestled with raw emotion, Rybakina felt the weight of observation. Her silence, so carefully maintained, had become a lightning rod for controversy. Yet she didn't defend herself. She didn't speak out of anger or ego. She simply carried the knowledge of what she had seen, what she had felt, and the strange, unavoidable tension of empathy mixed with competitiveness. This was more than a rivalry. This was a mirror held up to both players. It reflected fear, pride, fragility, and resilience. The public was obsessed with the fallout, but the real story wasn't the viral clips, the threads, or the hot takes. The story was in the quiet spaces between gestures, in the fleeting seconds of miscommunication, and the emotions neither athlete could fully control. By the time the press conferences rolled around, the world was waiting for a confrontation. Questions hung in the air like storm clouds. Would one player call out the other? Would accusations fly? Or would there be understanding? a rare glimpse into the human side of champions. And the tension was almost unbearable because everyone knew when Rybakina finally spoke, nothing would be the same. The day Rybakina finally chose to speak, the atmosphere was electric. The tennis world held its breath. This was more than a statement about a match. It was a window into the storm that had passed between two champions, a chance to understand the silence, the tension, and the raw emotion that had captivated millions. When she stepped to the podium, she did so with the same quiet composure that had defined her career. But this time, there was something different in her eyes, a flicker of vulnerability, of honesty. The words didn't come like a victory speech or a rehearsed statement. They came like an explanation, an attempt to untangle the complicated knot of emotion that had been captured on cameras for all the world to see. I know people have seen a lot, Rybakina began, her voice steady but soft. They've seen tears, frustration, anger. And I know many think they understand what happened, but they don't. Arena is one of the strongest competitors I've ever faced. What they saw wasn't weakness. It was pressure. It was someone giving everything they had in a moment that demanded more than any athlete can give. There was a pause, a quiet weight that filled the room. No interruption, no flashbulbs, just the hum of anticipation. I didn't approach her with judgment, Rybakina continued. I approached her with respect. And yes, I was watching. Yes, I noticed the moment, the glance, the hesitation. But it wasn't what people think. I wasn't cold. I was trying to understand, to honor the human in front of me who had just poured her soul onto the court. The words landed like a shockwave. For weeks, speculation had painted Rybakina as detached, almost unsympathetic. But here she was, revealing the truth behind that brief, electric moment, explaining what cameras couldn't capture, the empathy beneath the silence, the complexity behind a glance. Fans and commentators alike paused. Some watched clips of the match again, searching for the invisible cues Rybakina described. Others read her words and felt a shift, a reframing of a story that had been told as confrontation, now understood as connection. Rybakina didn't stop there. She spoke of rivalry, the fierce, consuming kind that pushes athletes to their limits. She spoke of respect, of shared pain, of the delicate balance between competition and humanity. In tennis, she said, sometimes our emotions betray us. Sometimes the world sees our struggle and assumes weakness, but struggle can be courage too. Across continents, Sabalenka's own team listened. There was no dramatic confrontation, no televised reconciliation. But in those words, there was acknowledgement, validation. Finally, someone had seen her not as a figure of collapse, but as a warrior under pressure. The cameras, which had captured tears and tension, now captured relief, a softening. The narrative began to shift, no longer just a story of heartbreak and spectacle. It became a story of honesty, of resilience, of the human side of champions who exist not only in trophies, but in moments of raw vulnerability. And yet, even as understanding spread, questions lingered. Could this explanation repair the cracks left by the public scrutiny? Could the world stop seeing Sabalenka through the lens of one emotional night? Could Rybakina maintain her composure while continuing to push the boundaries of a rivalry now charged with emotion, history, and empathy? For a moment, it felt like the tennis world held its breath, caught between controversy and resolution, between spectacle and truth. And as the arena emptied and the headlines began to shift, one thing was certain. This moment, this exchange would echo in every match, every interview, and every whispered conversation about Sabalenka and Rybakina. Because sometimes the truth doesn't just settle scores. Sometimes it changes the way we see everything. When the lights dimmed on that court, the echoes of a night full of drama lingered long after the last cheer faded. The match, the tears, the smashed racket, and the viral glances were no longer just a spectacle. They had become a story that would define a chapter of women's tennis for years to come. Not for the scoreline, not for the titles, but for what it revealed about the human side of champions. Aryna Sabalenka, once seen as nearly invincible, had reminded the world that strength and vulnerability coexist. Her tears weren't a weakness. Her raw emotion wasn't a failure. In fact, it was a revelation. The moment she broke, the moment she let the world see the weight of expectation, pressure, and self-doubt, it made her more relatable, more human, and paradoxically, more formidable. The courage to confront one's emotions under the glare of millions is a strength few can claim. And while the headlines fixated on controversy, the true legacy of that night was in the courage she displayed, unfiltered, unedited, undeniable. ELENA Rybakina, too, would be remembered differently because of that night. Not only for her impeccable tennis, her ice-cold serves, or her precision on court, but for the grace she showed in the face of emotional turbulence. Her silence had been misread as detachment, her calm as indifference. Yet when she spoke, she revealed the depth of her understanding, the empathy that underlies true champions. She didn't need to defend herself or cast blame, she simply illuminated the humanity of her rival, and in doing so, elevated the sport beyond points and rankings. The match, the reactions, the speculation, all of it will linger in highlight reels and social media threads. But what remains etched in memory is far deeper than statistics. It is the reminder that competition is never purely physical. It is emotional. It is mental. It is the collision of pride, vulnerability, ambition, and empathy. And the echoes of that collision will resonate with players and fans alike for years to come. Rybakina and Sabalenka had created more than a rivalry. They had created a mirror. Through the highs, lows, and raw, unfiltered moments, fans glimpsed the humanity that often hides behind the trophies. They saw the fragility that fuels resilience, the silence that carries empathy, and the tears that reveal courage. Every glance, every misread gesture, every burst of emotion told a story beyond the scoreboard. And as the tennis world reflects on that night, a question lingers, compelling and haunting. How many times have we misread champions? How often do we mistake emotion for weakness, silence for arrogance, or vulnerability for failure? In the stories of Sabalenka and Rybakina, the lesson is clear. The greatest moments of sport are not just about who wins or loses, but about who dares to reveal the human truth behind the game. Years from now, fans will still recall that final, not just for the points, not just for the winner, but for the storm that erupted and the courage that emerged. The shattered racket, the trembling hands, the glance across the net, they will live as symbols of more than a match. They will live as reminders that behind every champion is a human being, capable of fear, frustration, empathy, and brilliance. In the end, the legacy of that night is not defined by controversy, but by humanity. And as new generations watch, analyze, and debate, one truth remains. These two women, in their confrontation and understanding, elevated the sport. They taught us that rivalry is powerful, emotion is unavoidable, and grace under pressure can speak louder than any victory speech. Was this just a match? Or was it the moment that changed how we see women's tennis and the champions who dare to be human in the spotlight? The answer is left to history, but the memory of that night, raw and real, will linger forever. If you felt the intensity of that night, the heartbreak, and the raw courage on the court, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't miss the next chapter of tennis rivalries, shocking exchanges, and behind-the-scenes moments that the world doesn't always see. Comment below, whose side are you on? Did Sabalenka show strength through her tears? Or did Rybakina's calm truly define the moment? We want to hear your take on this unforgettable clash. And remember, the story doesn't end here. Turn on notifications to witness every emotional twist, every shocking exchange, and every moment that will shape the future of women's tennis.